Today, we're diving straight into one of the most intense, high-stakes moments in human history. We are stepping right back into the terrifying geopolitical pressure cooker of April 1961. The Cold War is raging. The US and the Soviet Union are completely locked in this massive struggle for global supremacy. And right in the middle of all that tension, one man is about to step into a tiny metal capsule and completely shatter the ceiling of what America thought was possible.
So let's take a quick look at this timeline, because you really have to understand just how far behind America was falling in the space race. Back in 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. It was just this tiny, beeping little sphere, but it sent absolute shockwaves across America. I mean, if the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, they could potentially launch weapons across continents, right? So America responds by creating NASA in 1958, with one clear goal: catch up. But then comes a devastating gut punch in April 1961. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin actually becomes the first human to orbit Earth. Moscow scored a massive victory, and Washington, well, they panicked. Which brings us to May 1961.
With the Soviet Union racking up these huge victories, a really uncomfortable question started gripping the US. Was America already too late? National pride, technological supremacy, and honestly, potentially global survival were hanging in the balance. Newspapers are screaming these wild headlines, politicians are demanding answers, and everyday citizens are just flat out terrified. NASA desperately needed a response, and they needed it immediately. They needed a hero. Section 1. Meet Alan Shepard, the right man for the job. To carry the hopes of an entire nation on his shoulders, America went with Commander Alan Bartlett Shepard Jr. And looking at these credentials, you can see exactly why NASA trusted him with this. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a U.S. Naval Academy grad, a combat veteran, and literally one of the finest test pilots in the whole country. He was known for being intensely competitive, a bit blunt sometimes, but always razor sharp. You know, when you're strapping a human being to the top of an experimental rocket, you absolutely need someone with nerves of steel. Shepard was exactly the guy for the job. Moving on to Section 2, the long wait, a human in a machine. Picture this. It's May 5th, 1961. Cape Canaveral. Before dawn, with the literal weight of the free world on his shoulders, Shepard wakes up. And he's completely calm. He actually sits down and eats what would become this highly traditional, very human astronaut breakfast: steak, scrambled eggs, toast, OJ, and coffee. It's such a fascinating contrast, isn't it? The completely mundane reality of eating a normal breakfast right before you go out to potentially ride a controlled explosion into the unknown. Now, the engineering scale here is just wild. Look at the contrast between that massive 83-foot Redstone rocket, which is basically a giant silo of explosive fuel and fire, and the claustrophobic Freedom 7 capsule he was actually strapped into. The capsule was only about 6 feet high. It was barely bigger than the front seat of your car. No room to stand, no room to even stretch. Shepard just had to recline tightly in this tiny sea of switches, gauges, and metal. So he's strapped into this tiny tin can, and thanks to weather and technical glitches, minutes drag into agonizing hours. And after all that time trapped in there, we get this surprisingly human, kind of embarrassing moment. Shepard urgently needed to, well, go to the bathroom. NASA's brilliant engineers hadn't actually designed a solution for this yet. So after a bunch of debate, Mission Control just gave him permission to relieve himself right into his suit. It shorted out some of his medical sensors, but hey, the mission continued. Just a stark reminder of how incredibly experimental all of this was. Section 3. 15 minutes of history. The flight of Freedom 7. Finally, after more than 4 hours of just sitting there waiting, at 9:34 a.m. Eastern Time, the countdown hits 0. A thunderous roar absolutely shakes Cape Canaveral. Flames erupts beneath the pad, acceleration slams him into his seat, and Shepard just calmly radios this totally iconic phrase: "Liftoff, and the clock is started." Across the country, factories paused, schools rolled those clunky televisions into classrooms, and millions of Americans just erupted in cheers. The U.S. was finally on its way into space. You have to imagine the physical toll this took on his body. During that rapid climb, he was hit with extreme forces exceeding 6 Gs. That is 6 times the normal force of gravity just pinning him down. But despite that crushing weight, he stayed completely composed. He kept reporting his conditions back to Earth, while the blue sky outside his little window turned pitch black. Pushing higher and faster, the Redstone engine shuts down, the capsule separates, and he hits an altitude of over 116 miles. He officially crossed the boundary into space.
For about 5 minutes, he became the very first American to experience zero gravity. Little objects drifted around the cabin, and looking through his periscope, he saw this unforgettable sight, the curved Earth, that glowing blue line of the atmosphere, and clouds just swirling over the oceans. Now, let's look at this comparison because it's absolutely crucial to our explainer today. You might be wondering, wait, if Gagarin already orbited the Earth, why was Shepard's shorter suborbital flight such a big deal? Well, while Gagarin was essentially just a passenger on an automated flight, NASA needed to prove humans could do more than just go along for the ride. Shepard's proved a massive advantage for the US by actually taking manual control of his spacecraft. He used his hand controller to successfully orient Freedom 7 in space. He wasn't just a payload, he was a pilot. Of course, getting up there is really only half the battle. Then came the terrifying part, re-entry. He's plummeting back toward Earth at over 5,000 miles per hour. Gravity violently reclaims the capsule. Freedom 7 is shaking. The heat shield outside is glowing white hot as temperatures hit thousands of degrees. This was the ultimate moment of truth, where even the tiniest flaw could end in total disaster. But Shepard just calmly monitored his instruments, trusting his training and the engineering. And just like that, the drogue parachute deploys, followed perfectly by the main canopy. The entire flight was over in exactly 15 minutes and 28 seconds. He had a safe, firm splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean, recovery choppers hoisted him up to the USS Lake Champlain, and boom, mission accomplished. Which brings us to Section 4, the Moon and Beyond, the ripple effect. Shepard's success instantly made him a national hero. It completely restored American confidence during a really dark, critical moment. And that newfound confidence directly inspired this famous, bold challenge from President John F. Kennedy just 20 days later. JFK gets up in front of Congress and says, "We choose to go to the moon." Honestly, without the success of Freedom 7, that political declaration and the whole Apollo 11 timeline might have looked very, very different. Shepard proved America belonged up there. But you know what's crazy? Shepard's legacy didn't even end in 1961. He actually developed a really serious inner ear disorder that grounded him for years. Everyone thought his flying days were over, but he gets corrective surgery, gets cleared to fly again, and in 1971, he commands Apollo 14. He became the 5th man to ever walk on the moon. He even snuck a golf club up there and famously hit a couple of golf balls across the lunar surface. From a terrifying 15-minute suborbital hop to literally playing golf on the moon, it is just an absolutely unmatched legacy. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. We usually think of history as this big, slow thing that takes decades or centuries to unfold. But look at what we've covered today. Can 15 minutes rewrite the future? Alan Shepard proved that sometimes history doesn't need years. Sometimes a single 15-minute launch is literally all it takes to erase a nation's setbacks, ignite a whole generation's ambition, and change the world forever. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.